Thomas positioned himself discreetly at the hall's periphery, observing the Leora inhabitants. They navigated the space with an ethereal grace, their lengthy garments shimmering in hues reminiscent of a sunrise. Their vocalizations were as soothing melodies, seemingly transported by the wind. Despite his 5-year residency on their planet, the experience still retained a dreamlike quality. He held the distinction of being the first human invited to reside on Leora. Earthbound conversations often depicted the Leora as reserved and aloof, yet Thomas discovered their inherent kindness and wisdom. Their discourse was measured, their smiles subtle, and they regarded life as an invaluable entity. Thomas fulfilled a unique role, an envoy, a terrestrial representative tasked with fostering peace and camaraderie between humans and Leora. This undertaking wasn't invariably effortless. The two species exhibited stark contrasts. Humans were characterized by their rapid movements, boisterous communication, and abundance of concepts, while the Leora favored deliberate motion, gentle speech, and profound contemplation before action. Yet Thomas demonstrated patience, attentiveness, and gradual learning, eventually earning their trust, particularly that of Princess Era. Era, the Leora Queen's daughter and the world's future sovereign, possessed a quietude even exceeding that of her people. While many perceived her as timid, Thomas recognized her thoughtfulness. Their collaborations were frequent. Era shared insights into her people's history, art, and music. She unveiled their gardens, where flora emitted a nocturnal luminescence, beneath skies adorned with a multitude of silver stars. Thomas discovered tranquility there, and incrementally, something profounder: love. This affection wasn't instantaneous. It resembled a gradual sunrise, intensifying with each passing day. He observed the radiant gleam in her eyes during moments of laughter, her attentiveness to every detail, from the most minuscule flower to the youngest child. She embodied a gentle yet resilient strength. However, Thomas concealed his emotions. He was human. She was Leora royalty. Expressing such aspirations was deemed inappropriate. Tonight, however, presented a divergence. The Festival of Lights had commenced, a Leora celebration of peace and unity. Lanterns levitated, casting a soft glow while melodies of hope filled the air. Thomas accompanied Era at the hall's forefront. She was attired in a pale silver robe, minuscule lights encircling her like celestial bodies. "You seem subdued tonight," Era remarked softly. Thomas offered a smile. "I am reflecting." "On what?" she inquired. He surveyed their surroundings. "On my fortune in being here." Era's gaze met his, her eyes clear and profound, resembling a tranquil lake. "Your presence isn't mere luck," she stated. "It stems from your choice to comprehend us, an endeavor many would eschew." Thomas's heartbeat quickened. "It has been a privilege to learn from you." "You have imparted knowledge to us as well," Era asserted, observing the floating lanterns. "Many of our people now perceive humans differently because of you." Thomas struggled to articulate a response. He yearned to confess his feelings, yet the words remained trapped within his chest. His love for her had spanned years, but fear stifled his voice. They stood in shared silence, a soft song emanating from the gathering. Thomas wished for the moment's perpetuation. Later, as the festival concluded, Era addressed him again. "Would you accompany me on a stroll through the gardens?" she requested. "Certainly," Thomas replied. They exited the hall, traversing tranquil pathways. The flowers emitted a gentle luminescence, miniature lights dancing in the atmosphere. Era halted beside a still pool of water, the moon's reflection shimmering like a silver disk. "I seek solace here when contemplation is needed," she confided. Thomas acknowledged with a nod. "It is serene." They stood shoulder to shoulder, their reflections juxtaposed in the water. Thomas yearned to express more, yet apprehension persisted. Era gazed at him gently. "Thomas," she began, "do you ever experience loneliness here?" He shook his head slowly. "Not in your presence." A momentary silence ensued, then Era offered a soft smile, prompting Thomas to entertain the possibility of hope. The following day, Thomas awoke early. The Festival of Lights continued, its duration spanning 3 days and nights. This day featured a special evening ceremony, one Thomas had never witnessed. Era had described it extensively, yet he had always observed from afar. This time she had invited him to stand beside her. Thomas dressed meticulously in the attire provided by the Leora, unadorned yet elegant, long white robes with a silver sash. He wore the small insignia designating him as Earth's envoy. As he emerged, soft music permeated the air. The entire city pulsated with gentle sounds and warm illumination. The Leora people navigated the streets deliberately, carrying miniature lanterns. Each lantern contained a tiny glowing flower, emitting a soft golden light. Thomas observed children carefully releasing their lanterns skyward, the lanterns ascending like diminutive stars, joining others until the sky resembled a luminous sea. "Thomas!" a gentle voice called. He turned. Era stood there, adorned in pale blue robes that shimmered with her movements. She held a lantern, its internal light dancing like a miniature sun. Thomas's heart lifted at the sight of her. "I am pleased you are here," Era expressed. "Will you join me at the temple?" He nodded. "Of course." They proceeded through the city together, people smiling as they passed. Thomas noted the subtle bows of respect directed towards Era. Each greeting returned with grace. He still found it surreal, walking beside a princess on another world. The temple resided at the city's highest point, constructed of white stone, smooth as glass. At its apex was an open space offering a panoramic view of the sky. Thomas followed Era up the extensive steps. Upon reaching the summit, a gentle breeze circulated. "Look," Era directed, pointing towards the horizon. Thomas followed her gaze. Lanterns ascended from every corner of the city, imbuing the sky with golden light. It was a spectacle of beauty, tranquility, and peace. Era held her lantern close momentarily, then addressed Thomas. "Do you know the significance of this ritual?" she inquired. He shook his head. "I am aware of its traditional nature, but not its origin." She smiled gently. "Long ago, our world was shrouded in darkness. Hope had diminished. But one individual ignited a small light. Others followed. Gradually, the darkness receded. We believe that each light contributes hope to the world." Thomas nodded slowly. "That is a beautiful narrative." "It is more than a narrative," Era stated softly. "It is a pledge that we shall never relinquish hope." She extended her lantern towards him. "Would you assist me in releasing this one?" Thomas carefully accepted the lantern. Together, they held it aloft. The internal light intensified as they released it. Slowly, it ascended, joining the others. Thomas watched its ascent until it became a mere point of light among many. "It is peculiar," Thomas remarked quietly. "I have observed stars throughout my life, yet I have never witnessed anything akin to this." Era gazed at him. "You are a light, Thomas. You arrived from another world, bringing hope when our trust in humans was uncertain. You demonstrated kindness." Thomas felt his throat constrict. He struggled to formulate a response. His intention had always been to fulfill his duty. He hadn't considered himself exceptional. Era touched his hand lightly. "You are more significant than you realize." They remained there, observing the ascent of more lanterns. Thomas realized he was now holding her hand, and she did not withdraw. The ceremony concluded with subdued music. People gradually departed the temple, but Thomas and Era remained. They sat side by side on the smooth stone floor, observing the stars and lanterns. "I wish this night could endure eternally," Thomas expressed softly. Era smiled. "The lights will diminish, but the hope they convey will persist." Thomas gazed at her. "You embody hope." For a fleeting moment, their gazes locked, and Thomas wondered if she comprehended the depth of his feelings. As they walked back towards the palace, Era stated, "Tomorrow, I wish to show you something witnessed by only a select few." Thomas smiled. "I would appreciate that." And in his heart, he hoped it was something intended solely for them. The morning following the Festival of Lights, the atmosphere felt rejuvenated and tranquil. Gentle breezes rustled through the tall trees in the royal gardens. Thomas stood on the balcony outside his room, overlooking the city of lights. Lanterns from the previous night still floated serenely, gradually fading with the sunrise. Today held a distinction. Princess Era had promised to reveal something to him. She had spoken softly the night before, her words almost a secret. Thomas pondered its nature. Despite his years among the Leora people, certain places and traditions remained unknown to him. Later that morning, a gentle chime resonated at his door. Thomas opened it to find Era waiting. She wore simple attire, foregoing the elegant robes of a princess for a plain tunic and soft shoes. Her hair was tied back, and she smiled upon seeing him. "Are you prepared?" she inquired. Thomas nodded. "Where are we going?" She tilted her head. "You shall see." They traversed the tranquil palace halls, unaccompanied by guards or servants. Ara appeared relaxed, even joyful. Thomas mirrored her sentiment. They navigated the garden paths, then exited the palace grounds entirely. As they walked, Thomas observed the distinctiveness of this city sector. It was quiet, featuring small homes and gardens abundant with flowers. Leora children played near miniature fountains, some waving upon spotting Era, who responded with smiles. After a while, they left the city behind. A stone path guided them towards the hills. The air carried a sweet fragrance, reminiscent of the ubiquitous flowers on Leora. Thomas observed Era's quiet gait, her eyes occasionally closed, as if listening to an imperceptible sound. Finally, they reached a small hill, a single tree adorning its summit. Its leaves shimmered silver in the sunlight. Era halted there, turning to face him. "This is where I seek solace when contemplation is needed," she confided. Thomas surveyed their surroundings. The entire city was visible from this vantage point, beyond which lay verdant fields and, in the distance, silver mountains meeting the sky. "It is beautiful," Thomas expressed softly. Era smiled. "It is serene. Few venture here. It is a place for introspection." They sat beneath the tree, its silver leaves emitting a soft rustling sound in the breeze. For a while they remained silent. Thomas felt a sense of peace he had not known on Earth. After some time, Era spoke again. "Initially, I harbored apprehension towards humans," she confessed quietly. "Upon the arrival of the first envoys, I perceived them as boisterous and imprudent. I lacked trust." Thomas listened attentively. He knew many Leora shared this sentiment. "But then you arrived," she continued. "You were distinct. You listened. You did not rush. You demonstrated respect for our customs. That is why my mother permitted your continued stay." Thomas smiled faintly. "I was merely striving to comprehend." Era gazed at him. "You accomplished more than that. You instilled hope that humans could be our allies." Thomas felt a warmth in his chest. He had always aspired to contribute positively, but hearing it from Era imbued it with reality. "I was apprehensive as well," Thomas admitted. "I believed I would never integrate here, that I would perpetually remain an outsider." "You are not," Era stated firmly. "Not to me." For a moment, Thomas was speechless. Her words resonated deeply within him. He gazed at her, and she met his gaze with gentle eyes. "I had always felt isolated," Era confided softly. "Even within the palace, even among my own people. But in your presence, it is different." Thomas yearned to express his feelings, yet the words proved elusive. He inhaled slowly. "I understand," he stated quietly. "In your presence, I feel at home." They sat in silence again. Then, without conscious deliberation, Era reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cool and light, yet her touch conveyed warmth. Thomas remained still, fearing she might withdraw, but she did not. They remained thus for an extended period, the wind gently rustling through the silver leaves, creating a soft, melodic sound. Finally, Era spoke again. "There is something I wish to confide in you," she stated. Thomas turned towards her, listening intently. "But not today," she added, smiling. "Soon?" He smiled back. "I shall wait." As they walked back towards the palace, hand in hand, Thomas realized his apprehension had dissipated. Something had shifted between them, something subtle yet profound. And deep within, he hoped that soon he could express the feelings he had harbored for so long. The days following the Festival of Lights unfolded peacefully. Thomas and Era increased their time spent together, visiting gardens, strolling beside clear streams, and sitting beneath trees as the sun traversed the sky. Thomas sensed a growing connection between them, akin to a small flame warming his heart with each smile she offered. Yet, despite these tranquil days, Thomas experienced an internal restlessness. He had carried his feelings for Era for years. Each time he gazed at her, his heart brimmed with unspoken words. Yet something within him indicated that the time was near. He had to confess his feelings soon. One serene afternoon, Era invited Thomas to the palace library. The room was expansive and circular, its tall shelves laden with ancient tomes. Light from the windows imbued the air with a golden hue. The books exuded an aroma of aged paper and flowers. Thomas cherished this space. "I wish to show you something," Era stated. She approached a table and retrieved a slender book with a silver cover. Thomas drew closer. The cover bore a symbol, a star encircled by soft lines. Era opened the book, revealing pages filled with exquisite calligraphy and miniature illustrations. "This is our most ancient songbook," she explained, containing melodies of love and hope. Thomas observed the delicate drawings of individuals holding hands, standing beneath stars. The words, though illegible to him, seemed imbued with quiet joy. "My people believe that music communicates when words prove insufficient," Era stated. "Sometimes it is easier to sing than to speak." Thomas smiled. "I comprehend that." Era glanced at him. "There is a song within this book that frequently occupies my thoughts." She pointed to a page depicting two individuals standing beneath a tree. It recounts the tale of two souls, separated by distance, who find each other and become one. Thomas's heartbeat quickened. He gazed at her, and for a fleeting moment, she returned his gaze with a warmth in her eyes. "Era," he began, but his voice was subdued. She closed the book gently. "Come with me." They exited the library and stepped outside. The day was transitioning into evening, the sky painted in soft hues of pink and orange. Era guided him towards the royal gardens. They traversed fountains, flowers, and smooth stone paths, eventually reaching a small, circular clearing. In its center stood a tree with golden leaves emitting a gentle glow as if touched by starlight. "This is the Tree of Promise," Era stated. "Long ago, my people came here to make vows, not laws or duties, but pledges of the heart." Thomas stared at the tree. It was beautiful, yet his heart was too overwhelmed with emotion to think clearly. "Why have you brought me here?" he inquired quietly. Era turned to face him. "Because I wish for you to express the truth residing within your heart." For a moment, Thomas was breathless. Then he inhaled slowly, and the words he had carried for so long emerged. "I have loved you for years," he stated, his voice soft yet resolute. "From the first time you unveiled your world to me, I witnessed your kindness, your strength, your gentle heart. I endeavored to remain silent, believing it impossible, but I can no longer conceal it." Era did not respond immediately. She stepped closer, her eyes radiant. Then, very softly, she stated, "I know." Thomas blinked. You knew?" She nodded. "I sensed it in your voice, in your gait, in your attentiveness." Thomas's heart raced. "And how do you feel?" Era smiled. "I believed I could never give my heart to someone outside my people. But you are not merely from another world. You are kind, patient, and true. My heart has already made its choice." Thomas felt a warmth and brightness fill him. He had dreamt of this moment, yet its reality felt even more profound, standing beneath the Tree of Promise. Era reached out and took his hand in both of hers. "This tree has stood for 1,000 years. May it bear witness to my pledge to you." Thomas grasped her hand tightly. "And mine to you." They stood there, the tree's leaves shimmering. Words were now superfluous. Their hearts had spoken. Later, as they walked back to the palace, hand in hand, Thomas realized something. He was no longer a visitor on this world. He was home. The days following Thomas and Era's pledge beneath the Tree of Promise were radiant and filled with tranquility. Thomas smiled more frequently, as did Era. They spent their mornings strolling through the gardens, their afternoons perusing ancient narratives in the palace library, and their evenings sitting quietly by the fountains as the stars emerged. However, one morning Era summoned Thomas to meet her in an unfamiliar location. Upon his arrival, he found Era standing beside a small, silver vessel. It resembled a smooth stone, unadorned yet beautiful. The ship rested in a tranquil field behind the palace, the wind gently rustling through the tall grass surrounding them. Era turned and smiled upon seeing him. "Come," she beckoned. "Today, I have something to show you." Thomas approached her, observing the ship with curiosity. "Where are we going?" "It is a place cherished by me," Era replied. "I have only revealed it to individuals I trust." Thomas felt his heart warm at her words. He trusted her as well, more than anyone. He followed her into the ship. The interior was compact and quiet, featuring 2 seats and a window that encompassed their surroundings. Soon they ascended slowly into the sky. Thomas watched the palace diminish below, followed by the city of lights, its circular structures and glowing gardens gradually disappearing behind soft clouds. Era piloted the ship smoothly, her composure unwavering, her hands steady on the controls. Thomas observed her momentarily before speaking. "You are a skilled pilot." She smiled. "I have been flying since my youth." They traversed expansive fields and shimmering rivers. Eventually, they reached a place unfamiliar to Thomas. A valley replete with vibrant blue trees, their leaves soft and rounded. In its center lay a lake so clear it mirrored the sky like glass. Era landed the ship near the water's edge. She disembarked first, then turned to Thomas. "Come," she invited. They walked along the shore together. Thomas surveyed their surroundings in awe. Birds with silver wings soared gently over the water, soft flowers blooming along the edge, emitting a faint luminescence as they passed. "What is this place?" Thomas inquired quietly. Era knelt beside the lake, touching the water with her fingers. "This is the Mirror Lake. It is said to reveal the true heart of whoever gazes into it." Thomas knelt beside her. He gazed into the water momentarily, observing his reflection, but then something more. He saw himself standing with Era beneath the Tree of Promise, his own smile and her hand in his. Era observed him closely. "What do you see?" He turned to her. "I see who I aspire to be." She smiled gently. "That is why I brought you here, to demonstrate that you are already becoming that person." Thomas sat quietly for a moment, then inquired, "Why do you trust me so implicitly?" Era retrieved a small, smooth, round stone from the shore, placing it in his hand. "Because you listen, because you are kind, and because you waited. My people value actions above words, and you have demonstrated your heart through both." Thomas held the stone tightly. "I am glad I waited." They sat beside the lake for an extended period. Thomas observed the reflections in the water, contemplating his journey. Years ago, he had been a stranger here. Now he felt a sense of belonging. As the sun began to set, Era stood. She turned to Thomas, extending her hand. "I have something for you." He stood and accepted her hand. She placed a small silver ring in his palm. It was unadorned, yet a soft light emanated from within. "This is a bond ring," she explained. "In our tradition, it signifies a pledge made and to be upheld." Thomas gazed at her, surprised. "Are you certain?" She smiled. "I am. You are now an integral part of my life." Thomas slid the ring onto his finger. It fit perfectly. He felt a gentle warmth emanating from it, as if carrying her touch. Then Era raised her hand, revealing an identical ring. "We are connected," she stated softly. Thomas smiled. "We always were." As night descended, they sat together beneath the stars by the tranquil lake, and for the first time, Thomas felt utterly at peace, knowing his heart had finally found its home. Days transpired quietly after Thomas and Era exchanged their bond rings by the Mirror Lake. Thomas awoke each morning with a sense of tranquility. He no longer felt like a guest on the Leora world. He felt a sense of belonging. Yet, deep within, Thomas knew one crucial step remained. The Leora people were kind and peaceful, but they adhered to strong traditions. Even with Era's choice, the Royal Council's approval of their pledge was paramount. Without their blessing, the bond between a princess and a human would remain incomplete. One morning, Era approached Thomas in the garden. A soft smile graced her face, yet he detected a hint of seriousness in her eyes. "The council wishes to convene with you," she stated. Thomas nodded slowly. "I anticipated as much." Era took his hand. "Do not be apprehensive. They are wise. They will listen." Thomas smiled back, despite his nervousness. "I hope so." That afternoon, Thomas accompanied Era to the council hall. It was a circular chamber with tall windows, soft light filtering through, creating patterns on the stone floor. At its center resided a large silver table, circular in shape, with 12 seats surrounding it. The council members were already present, each adorned in simple robes. Their faces were calm, yet Thomas sensed their profound wisdom. They had lived long lives, guiding their people through significant events. Thomas respected them. Era stood beside him, initiating the discourse. "Honored council, I have brought Thomas here to speak." The eldest member, Elder Saren, nodded. His eyes were gentle yet serious. "We welcome you, Thomas," he stated. "We are aware of your extended residence among us. You have demonstrated kindness and patience." Thomas bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, Elder Saren." Another council member spoke, a woman named Mia. "But this is unprecedented. A bond between a Leora, a princess, and a human has never occurred. Many among our people do not comprehend it." Thomas inhaled slowly. "I understand their apprehension. I originate from a different world. I am not Leora by birth. But I have resided here, learned your customs, and I respect them deeply." Elder Saren nodded again. "Why do you seek this bond?" Thomas gazed at Era, then back at the council. "Because my heart has chosen her, not because she is a princess, but because she is Era. She is kind, wise, and strong. She has shown me the meaning of belonging. I wish to stand beside her, not as a stranger, but as her partner." A quiet pause filled the chamber. Then another elder spoke, a man named Ren. "And if we do not condone this bond?" Thomas maintained his gaze. "Then I shall continue to reside among you with respect, honoring Era's choice, but also respecting your decision." Era squeezed his hand gently. Thomas felt her support, and it bolstered his strength. The council members exchanged glances. Elder Saren spoke again. "You have demonstrated patience and love. These are qualities we cherish. But one more element is required." Thomas listened attentively. "You must pass the circle of understanding," Saren stated. Thomas nodded, despite his uncertainty regarding its meaning. "What is it?" Era smiled softly. "It is a period of quietude spent in the Hall of Voices. You must sit and listen to the narratives of our people. You will hear their hopes and fears. You must comprehend their hearts." Thomas agreed without hesitation. "I shall do it." That evening, Thomas entered the Hall of Voices. It was a tranquil space, illuminated by soft light with a smooth stone floor. He sat in the center of the circle. Around him, soft voices commenced their discourse, recounting tales from antiquity, stories of joy and sorrow, hope and loss. Thomas listened intently. He felt the emotions of the Leora people, their love for peace, their measured ways, their aspirations for friendship with others. He comprehended their hearts more profoundly than ever before. The following morning, he returned to the council. Elder Saren smiled faintly. "You have listened." Thomas bowed his head. "And I understand." The council members stood. Era stepped forward, her eyes radiant with hope. Elder Saren pronounced the final words. "We grant our blessing." Relief and joy flooded Thomas's heart. Era smiled, taking his hand. Together they exited the council hall, stepping into the sunlight. Their pledge was now universally accepted. News of the council's blessing disseminated rapidly throughout the kingdom. The Leora people were curious, yet hopeful. It represented a new beginning, a human and a Leora princess united. It was unprecedented, yet many perceived it as a harbinger of positive change. Thomas and Era were invited to stroll through the city gardens together. The people gathered along the pathways, smiling as they passed. Some offered flowers soft and colorful, gently placing them in Thomas's hands. Others presented sweet fruits or miniature gifts crafted from silver and glass. Thomas initially felt self-conscious, unaccustomed to such attention, but Era squeezed his hand, smiling at him. "They are joyful for us," she stated softly. Thomas smiled back. "I can see that." Following the walk, the Royal Council orchestrated a grand celebration, the first gathering of both Leora and people from Earth as a unified family. Ships arrived from Earth, carrying Thomas's old friends and leaders. They were welcomed with kindness and gentle melodies. The palace grounds were adorned with soft lights, levitating like stars above the gardens. Long tables were laden with fruits, breads, and beverages from both worlds. The air resonated with sweet music, played on instruments unfamiliar to Thomas, yet they evoked a sense of calm and joy. On the evening of the celebration, Thomas stood quietly in his room, observing the sunset. He reflected on the profound transformation of his life. He had arrived on this world as a visitor, anticipating a temporary sojourn. Now he was here to stay, his heart overflowing. A soft knock resonated at his door. "Come in," Thomas stated. Era entered. She wore a long dress crafted from soft silver cloth, shimmering like moonlight. Around her neck, she wore a simple chain bearing a small stone, identical to the one Thomas had held by the mirror lake. "You look beautiful," Thomas expressed with a smile. Era smiled back. "And you look prepared." Thomas wore robes in Leora style, soft and light, with subtle patterns narrating his story. Era reached out, gently touching his hand. "Are you apprehensive?" she inquired. He inhaled, nodding. "Slightly." She laughed softly. "So am I." They walked together to the garden where everyone awaited. The crowd quieted as they arrived. Elder Saren stood before them, holding a small bowl of clear water. "Today," Saren stated in his gentle voice, "we celebrate a bond between two worlds. Thomas, a man from Earth, and Era, Princess of Leora, have demonstrated that love and trust can transcend stars." He dipped his fingers into the water, allowing it to fall onto the ground between Thomas and Era. As water unites with land and sky, so do their hearts unite today. Thomas and Era held each other's hands. Era spoke first. "I give you my heart and my life. We shall walk together in peace and hope." Thomas smiled. "And I give you mine. I shall stand by you in light and in darkness, always." A soft sound, akin to wind rustling through leaves, arose, and miniature flowers began to bloom around them. The people cheered softly, raising their hands in joy. Then music filled the air, gentle and imbued with happiness. Thomas and Era traversed the crowd, greeting both Leora and humans alike. They shared meals, laughter, and narratives of their two worlds. Later that night, Thomas stood beside Era at the garden's edge. The stars above were luminous and close. "Do you ever contemplate what lies ahead?" Thomas inquired quietly. Era gazed up at the sky. "There is always more to discover," she stated. "But I am content here with you." Thomas smiled. "So am I." As they stood there, the lights from the ships and the stars above seemed to coalesce. Two worlds now united by love and understanding were no longer distant. They were one family, and Thomas knew deep in his heart that this was merely the inception of something beautiful. Following the celebration, life on Leora became even more radiant. Thomas and Era frequently strolled through the gardens hand in hand. The people smiled at them, many approaching to greet Thomas as a friend. He was no longer perceived as a terrestrial visitor. He was an integral part of their world. However, both Thomas and Era recognized that their collaborative endeavors could extend further. One morning, as they sat by the fountain in the palace garden, Era spoke softly. "Thomas, would you like to see my favorite star?" Thomas smiled. I would very much like that. Era explained that long ago she had dreamt of journeying far beyond Leora, visiting other stars and learning about other worlds. But her duty as princess had kept her home. Now, with Thomas beside her, she felt ready to explore. Thomas listened attentively, then nodded. Let us go together. They consulted with Elder Saren, who concurred with their journey. The council perceived it as a testament to the trust between Leora and Earth. They bestowed upon Era and Thomas a special ship, robust and swift, designed for prolonged interstellar voyages. A few weeks later, Thomas and Era stood at the launch field. Their ship shimmered in the morning light, smooth and silver, resembling a gentle leaf. Around them, people from both worlds gathered to bid them farewell. Elder Saren offered a blessing, holding a small stone from Mirror Lake. This is to remind you of home, he stated, placing it in Thomas's hand. Thomas smiled, holding the stone close. Soon, Thomas and Era boarded the ship. The interior was tranquil and calm. Era occupied the front controls, Thomas sitting beside her. As the ship ascended gently into the sky, they both gazed down at the world they cherished. Verdant fields, silver cities, and blue rivers, shimmering in the sunlight. They departed Leora's sky, venturing into the profound blackness of space. Stars filled the window, resembling tiny lamps in the darkness. Thomas felt a sense of peace sitting beside Era as the ship glided forward. For days they journeyed quietly, sharing meals and stories, laughing softly and observing the emergence of new stars. Sometimes they sat together in silence, holding hands and contemplating the infinite expanse. One day, the ship reached a luminous blue star. Era smiled upon seeing it. That is the one I spoke of, she stated. It is called Aya. The star was encircled by small worlds, each emitting a faint glow. They chose to visit one, a tranquil place characterized by soft winds and expansive lakes that mirrored the sky. Thomas and Era walked beside the water, savoring the new world. As they explored, they discovered simple flora and gentle fauna, moving slowly across the land. It was peaceful, untouched by conflict or adversity. Thomas deemed it an ideal location for learning and sharing. We should bring people here one day, Thomas suggested, from Leora and Earth. They could learn from each other, construct something new. Era smiled at his words. Yes, a place for both our worlds. They planted a small tree by the lake, one they had brought from Leora. Thomas placed the Mirror Lake stone at its base. This is the first seed, Thomas stated, of many more. Before their departure, Era captured an image of the tree, the stone, and Thomas standing proudly beside it. She smiled, knowing they were quietly creating history. As they journeyed back towards Leora, they discussed the future. They aspired to facilitate visits for other humans to Leora and Leora people to Earth. They envisioned schools where children from both worlds would learn together, gardens that cultivated Leora flora on Earth, and terrestrial trees on Leora. Thomas knew it would require time, but he also knew they could accomplish it together. Upon their return, they were greeted with jubilation. They shared their discovery of the new world with the council and the people. Hope resonated in everyone's eyes. Thomas and Era stood on the palace balcony that night, gazing at the stars. This is merely the inception, Era whispered. Thomas smiled. Yes, and we shall traverse this path together. The stars above them seemed to intensify their luminosity. Thomas held Era's hand, and together they dreamt of a future where two worlds could become one family. Months elapsed after Thomas and Era returned from their interstellar journey. Life on Leora remained peaceful, yet it was also infused with renewed hope. The narrative of their voyage to the star called Aya had disseminated to both Leora and Earth. People from both worlds were curious and enthusiastic about the possibilities. Thomas and Era spent numerous days together in the palace garden, formulating plans. They envisioned constructing a new home on the world they had discovered, a place where humans and Leora people could coexist, learn, and flourish. We can name it New Light, Era suggested one day, a home where two worlds converge. Thomas smiled. New Light. He repeated softly. I like that. With the Council's blessing and the endorsement of Earth's leaders, they commenced work on their dream. Engineers and builders arrived from both worlds. Leora ships and terrestrial machinery collaborated. They transported seeds from Leora and Earth to cultivate gardens and farms. They constructed homes that incorporated elements of both worlds in their design. Soft lights and curved walls from Leora, robust stone and wood from Earth. Thomas participated daily, contributing his own labor. He carried stones and planted trees. Era worked alongside him, engaging with the people, listening to their concepts. She ensured everyone felt they were an integral part of something extraordinary. One day, as Thomas planted a tree near the new schoolhouse, a young human boy approached him. Is it true you were the first human to reside on Leora? The boy inquired, his eyes wide. Thomas smiled and nodded. Yes, and now you will be among the first human children to live on New Light. The boy smiled brightly. I am eager to forge new friendships. Thomas observed as the boy ran off to join a group of Leora children playing near the gardens. It filled his heart. This was precisely what he had hoped for, a place where no one was a stranger. When the construction of New Light concluded, another celebration ensued. People from Leora and Earth gathered beneath the open sky. There were melodies from both worlds. The Leora played their soft instruments, and humans sang terrestrial songs. Together their voices ascended into the night, gentle and imbued with peace. Era stood on the elevated platform at the town square's center, Thomas beside her. She surveyed the assembled gathering. This is not merely a home for Leora and Earth, she stated. This is a home for peace, for friendship, and for the future. Thomas spoke next. Long ago I stood by Mirror Lake believing I was alone. But Era demonstrated that I was not. She believed in me. Now we stand here together, and we are no longer alone. The people cheered softly, raising their hands in joy. Miniature lights levitated above their heads, shining like stars. That night, Thomas and Era traversed the new town. They passed homes where Leora and human families shared meals. They observed children playing games that blended both Leora and terrestrial traditions. They exchanged smiles. It is functioning, Era stated softly. Thomas nodded. Yes, and this is merely the inception. As time progressed, New Light flourished. More people arrived from Earth and Leora. They constructed schools and gardens, parks and centers of learning. They shared narratives and melodies. There was always space for novel concepts and aspirations.